You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. The question of whether the Supreme Court will side with R. Kelly in his legal battles hinges on a myriad of complex legal, procedural, and constitutional issues. And in fact there is much that requires reviewing when it comes to the Chicago case, which saw the appeal judges prefer to side with the government and its Sony counterpart in the battle to silence the R&B King. Their choice to uphold the trial court's decision that saw R. Kelly receive a 20-year sentence for a number of wrongful convictions has since remained a point of great concern, and the Supreme Court judges are certainly not oblivious to all this. We all know that as a result of government and the trial court injustice, R. Kelly faces multiple convictions related to sexual abuse and exploitation which have stirred an endless public and legal debate. While predicting the outcome of a Supreme Court decision is inherently uncertain, there are several key points that could potentially influence the Supreme Court to side with Kelly. Constitutional safeguards that were violated and fair trial concerns form one primary argument that could sway the Supreme Court in favor of R. Kelly. And by this we are referring to the protection of his constitutional rights that were adamantly ignored by the authorities, and particularly the right to a fair trial. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to a fair trial for every citizen suspected of a crime. And this emphasizes an impartial jury, the right to confront witnesses for the credibility, and the right to adequate legal representation, a service that R. Kelly never received. R. Kelly fans and supporters as well as his defense team have consistently argued that excessive media coverage and public opinion heavily biased the jurors, thus impeding his right to an impartial trial both in New York and in Chicago. Additionally, further claims of procedural errors during the trial could turn pivotal as Supreme judges analyze the case files. If the defense submissions can demonstrate that significant procedural errors occurred that violated Kelly's rights, the Supreme Court will find grounds to overturn the rather unfair lower court decisions. These certainly include improper admission of evidence, ineffective counsel and various forms of prosecutorial misconduct. All who have been following the case against R. Kelly know well that inadmissible evidence was adopted and used in court to prejudice R. Kelly. And by this we are talking of the video evidence whose chain of custody was completely broken, that even the person who claimed to have been the first holder of the tapes, Jim DeRogatis, did not have the confidence to take the stand and testify in support of his own videotapes. R. Kelly's defense team in fact did raise serious concerns about the admission of certain testimonies and materials that they argue were prejudicial, and that should not have been considered by the jury. For instance, the inclusion of witnesses that were not directly connected to the specific charges but painted R. Kelly in an overwhelmingly negative light. Imagine approximately 45 prosecution witnesses took to the stand, yet R. Kelly was only charged for a few. This move to flood the courtroom with a multitude of irrelevant witnesses is internationally known to be a prejudicial strategy always intended to divert the jury from its primary focus to thinking the defendant is a very bad person. The Supreme Court, however, scrutinizes in depth whether the lower courts in fact adhered to proper standards regarding evidence quality, and if it is determined that the trial court admitted evidence that substantially prejudiced the jury against R. Kelly, this could be grounds for the Supreme Court to side with him and drop all charges. The Supreme Court's decision-making process is heavily influenced by precedent and the broader implications of their rulings. If Kelly's case raises significant issues about the interpretation of constitutional rights or procedural fairness, the court may opt to side with him to uphold the integrity of the entire legal system. For example, if the court finds that a lower court's handling of Kelly's case sets a dangerous precedent for future defendants, particularly regarding fair trial rights or the treatment of high-profile defendants in the media, they will more than likely rule in his favor to prevent future miscarriages of justice. Also remember that most of the charges that were brought against R. Kelly in Chicago had their statutes of limitations long expired. It would leave the entire U.S. Department of Justice in shame to uphold a conviction and sentence that were made under such circumstances that saw the Constitution technically overthrown. If statutes of limitation had already expired, they are no more. Amendments to these limitations do not operate retroactively to return charges which already expired many years back, and these could see the Supreme Court bend towards R. Kelly's side to protect the image of the U.S. justice system. While the negative public opinion largely caused by the surviving R. Kelly documentary heavily disfavors R. Kelly, the Supreme Court's role is to interpret the law impartially regardless of all such public sentiment. The Supreme Justices usually ensure that their decisions are rooted in solid legal principles rather than influenced by societal pressure like we saw with the trial court judges. In fact, this commitment by the Supreme Court to the rule of law can sometimes result in decisions that appear to contradict public opinion, but these are necessary to uphold constitutional safeguards for rights of citizens. Another consideration that could see the Supreme Court side with the defense is the severity of Kelly's sentencing. If the Supreme Court finds that his punishment is disproportionately harsh compared to the nature of the crimes, which is exactly what his lead attorney Jennifer Bonjean was emphasizing during the appeal, and particularly if procedural errors contributed to his overcharged conviction above the standard guidelines range, which is the case at hand, the Supreme Court will not hesitate to rule to reduce his sentence or to order a retrial. Remember that the Eighth Amendment protects against cruel and unusual punishment, and the Supreme Court will likely find that R. Kelly's case warrants intervention under this principle. As discussed, we can conclude that in fact several legal arguments and principles could potentially lead the Supreme Court to side with R. Kelly. And these include the protection of his constitutional rights, concerns over the fairness of the trial, admissibility of evidence, adherence to legal precedents, and ensuring that judicial decisions are based on the federal law rather than mere public opinion. Each of these factors plays a critical role in the Supreme Court's deliberation process and could collectively or individually influence a decision favorable to R. Kelly. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision will rest on a meticulous examination of legal arguments, constitutional protections, and procedural fairness, and without forgetting their primary role as the guardian of the rule of law in the face of even the most challenging and controversial cases. For the haters therefore who think it's over for the R&B king, well, the trial phase may be over, and the Chicago appeal may be over too. But it's not over for the R&B king, because the Supreme Court will not tolerate anyone that violates the laws of this land, and anything that contempts the constitutional safeguards which were enacted to serve a purpose after the need was identified. All this prejudice was predicted by the lawmakers, and therefore the safeguards to protect citizens from this kind of malice. R. Kelly will be vindicated once this matter is arraigned in front of the Supreme Judges to take a decision. According to Thanderzali Dubé, if the judges who are supposed to be the custodians of the law now realize that these women lied against R. Kelly, then there is no reason why Kelly is still kept in prison. It's now high time R. Kelly is freed. The problem with some women is that they want to be associated with renowned male celebrities so as to milk them dry of their finances. And if they don't get what they want, they then tell lies to punish the celebrity as a way of revenge. If you wish to take part in a live interview on this channel discussing any of these topics, let us know by emailing us on sashahnnewsroom@gmail.com for scheduling. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say. To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.